listen up, y'all. It's the queen of automation, Megan Donnelly, here to give you inspiration. Founders and business owners gather round. I'ma show you how to build systems that'll astound. Streamline your processes, no need.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Queen of Automation podcast, where we talk about why technology is only good when it works and how I help you make it work. I'm your host, Megan Donnelly, and today I'm excited to chat about life and digital technology with Josh McLean, author, founder, and one of the coolest and most inspirational finance guys I've had the pleasure of networking with. Without further ado, say hi, Josh, and tell everyone where you're tuning in from.
Tuning in from Portland, Oregon, or the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, and certainly excited to be on here and talk all things life and finance and how I'm not your typical finance guy.
I'm so excited to hear you say that, because when you think of the world of finance, for me, it's so funny because you think of the stereotypical kind of rigid numbers guy, right? Like, or girl, or, whoever person, rigid human that's very numbers oriented. And obviously you are, otherwise you wouldn't be in finance. But the personality of the finance world has changed so much. So I would love for you to kind of give us your backstory. Tell us how you got here and, why and how you're doing things differently, because it's such an inspiration reading your story and like hearing you tell your story. So tell us all about you and how you ended up kind of being the normal conforming, I don't even know what the right word is, finance guy.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll give you kind of the high level 30,000 foot view. We can kind of unpack it as we go. But I definitely, first part of my career was certainly pegged with wearing the suit and tie. I was color coordinating shirts based on, psychological responses. It was very interesting, but I had come from a background in my childhood where drugs and alcohol were my identity. And so when I had the light bulb switch on and figured out that's not the life or the journey or the path I want to go on, I quickly pivoted to really leaning into finance. Somebody asked me the simple question, "Hey, Josh, you seem to be really good with numbers. Why don't you go do something with that?" And I had never really considered what I was good at until that point. So that question set me on a journey of finance. I got my MBA in finance and my CFA charter and a bunch of other letters that make me look like alphabet soup. But the point being, my job title at that point equaled my identity, my success trajectory. That's kind of who I was. And then my car accident in 2012, that just everything came crashing down in terms of what I had built. This corporate facade is what I talk about in my book. And so the car accident forced me to kick down that cardboard facade and really lean into, who Josh was. And so that's where the reality of, hey, I have this kind of quirky, dry humor personality. And yes, finance is what pays the bills. I always joke with my daughters. I'm like, you see these 10 fingers? This is what brings food on the table. This is what we can go do the trips. They're like, what do you mean? And so, spreadsheets is what I do, but it's not who I am. And that's the big thing where finance, maybe more than any other profession, maybe lawyers, where you have this sense of your job identity is so wrapped up into, or your job title so wrapped into the identity that people get confused. And even when I got into Catalyst, people were like, whoa, Josh, purpose and living towards your purpose is too big of a calling. You need to go focus on something that's, they didn't use this word, but really it was safer. Why don't you go teach people spreadsheets, go teach people formulas, go do a budgeting spreadsheet. And I realized I actually stopped doing some things before COVID because people told me that was too hard or that was too big of a mission. And so COVID, things shut down. I shut down my personal brand for about a year and a half. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. And then post-COVID, what you're seeing, since you and I have interacted, is that post-COVID reemerge, kind of rising from the ashes of, I'm going to talk about purpose and alignment, and finance is what I do, but certainly not who I am.
Let's unpack that for a minute, because one of the things that I would love to kind of go back, if you're comfortable talking about it, is for me, I don't believe in like work-life balance. It's all life. right? Like your job and your personal life, you're like, it's all intertwined, right? And so it's one of those things where when I hear you tell your story about the car accident, if you guys want to go read it, you should go check out his LinkedIn. He goes into it a little bit more, and it's a really inspiring story, and inspiring that he, came back out of the ashes, if you will, the Phoenix Rising, right?
Yep.
The Phoenix
Yep.
Rising.
Yep.
And anyway, go read his story. We're not going to go into that, but time is the only thing you can't get back, and it's one of those things where when the whole work-life balance hustle culture is so dangerous, and so it's just disgusting is the only thing I can think of, right? Like, because you can't get the time back, and then something like a major life event happens, like what happened to you, and you go, oh shit, like you step back and you're like, oh, and it makes you realize, it kind of makes you hit that wall of, well, maybe I should do this differently, whether it's finance or technology or being a lawyer, or it doesn't matter what you do as a job. Like you said, it's not who you are. And unless people, I fully believe that unless people are figuring out that where you pick and choose to spend your time is really, really freaking important. And I think you've done a really great job of taking an industry that is known for being a little dry, being a little rigid, being a suit and tie, being like this 9 to 5, or even, probably longer hours than that if you're working corporate, right? I mean, because I know corporate finance guys that, they work all the time. They never take time off. Like they're always on call. And tell us how you broke through that, and like unpack that a little bit, because obviously that accident was a huge turning point for you, right? And waking you up and making you realize like, oh,
This isn't, it's like, this isn't going to work. I think there's a lot of different possible threads this question could go down, but ultimately it came down for me of the wake up call. I had been living, I'll say the daily lie of, well, just one more long night, or one more this, or one more that. And basically when I had the car accident and I really was forced, I was lying on the ground for hours in pain, headaches, the whole deal. But once I came through that, I asked the question that came that really forced me to change was, what's the trajectory of my life? Meaning, if I just keep doing this and I don't have any external forces come in, where am I headed? And I realized that I had been putting all my eggs in kind of the success bucket. And a lot of that is due to, I had what I call lopsided goal setting, meaning I had learned about goal setting back in, like early career days. And I applied that, and I actually did it successfully. I wanted to get letters after my name, make a certain amount of income. But the reality is I did it in only one area of my life, and I had sacrificed my health. I had sacrificed family connection. I had sacrificed all these things that I said were important, but I actually didn't invest time. And so I thought the bank of relationships, would last longer, the bank of health. And I realized that if I don't change, I might have more money in the bank per se, but I'm going to be fast forward 10, 20, 30 years, and I'll be living in this pool of regret. And so that's really the major question that helped me change my own trajectory.
Yeah. I think that when you're in your 20s, at least for our generation, or at least, and I won't pretend, I'm not even going to pretend to guess ages. We're not doing that. But knowing you have teenagers and I have teenagers, we're probably in that same age bracket. It was, you went to school, you climbed the corporate career ladder like that. That was what you're supposed to do, right? You're supposed to go get this big cushy job, and your goals are supposed to be this, and this. And that sucked. I'm just going to tell you, like, corporate was horrible. It was not a great experience. And I was just under that executive suite level when I left. And I was like, peace out. This is horrible. Like, and you spend all of your time working for someone else. You spend all of your time and energy and effort and pouring it all into something. And then you turn around one day and you realize, wow, like for me, it was, I just turned around and I missed my 3 boys. I missed like their entire childhood. Like I didn't go to any sports games. I was always on call. Every time I went on vacation, I had my laptop, and I'm sure you can relate. It's just this horrible feeling that you missed out on a huge chunk of your life. And it's like you said this, like, where do you want to be in 10, 20, 30 years? Yeah, you might have more money in the bank, but if you have a whole bunch of money and you can't use it or spend it or travel or whatever you want to do, whatever it is the thing that you want to do, if you can't do that, what's the hell's the point? Money does you no good if if it's just sitting there and you don't live your life.
Totally. The book, The 5 Regrets of the Dying, for me, by Bonnie Ware, if you haven't read it, certainly recommend it. But for me, it was the first time that I had somebody in my life, right? This was a book author that I'll never meet in person, but it was somebody, as I look to change my own life, books have been my own catalyst. And she was a hospice worker who basically summarized her years sitting beside the bed of people who were they could see the last days in their sight. And these were the top 5 things that people wish they would have done differently. And so for me, that was a big wake up call. And I realized I didn't set boundaries around what I was willing to compromise. I had these ideals of I want to be an engaged dad or, fill in the blank, but I just didn't set boundaries. And so for me, it was a mix of self-imposed, shame on me for not having the courage to put those boundaries. But also I realized that I was just in an environment where I wasn't going to thrive. And so that's where, there is a call, you kind of mentioned it, of, hey, why don't you go burn corporate and go to entrepreneurial land, which is possible. But for me, I'm actually living in this and space where I'm enjoying the corporate journey in terms of where I'm at. I'm getting to work on some really cool projects, really cool people. And so I'm doing Nike and Catalyst. And so for me, I get to have the full expression of who I am come to life across those 2 platforms. And so I'm kind of living, I used to feel that I was living 2 separate worlds, is what I would say before COVID. And today I'm actually living fully aligned, because who I am, part of it shows up in Catalyst and podcasts like this, and other parts show up in corporate. And so for me, it is actually the full expression of who I am.
There's such a great message there, because we've both had corporate experiences and you're still living yours. And this is just to everyone out there who's listening, like, corporate may or may not be a good fit for you. And you'll never know that unless you try. But I can tell you right now, like, my corporate experience in the end was horrible. But like in the beginning, like, I learned so much. And I'm so glad I spent 12 years there, because the experience was, you just can't get that type of experience. Like, where else are you going to manage a $1.5 million marketing budget, right? Like, you can't get that experience unless you do that, right? So the experience was awesome and it led me here. I wouldn't change it for the world. And I feel like there are companies out there. Nike is one of them. There's a few others that I can think of, and we won't go into their names, but there's a few really large organizations that are making huge pivotal changes because they're seeing the landscape change. They're seeing employees being unhappy. Everyone's being laid off, especially in the tech world. Like, there's all these huge changes, and their employees need to be able to have a side hustle or work on their own personal passion projects on the side. And whereas 10 years ago, companies were like, no, you can't do that. There's more and more companies saying, go ahead, build your personal brand, tell your personal story, because they're realizing that the more you grow, especially again in the finance world, right? We're just going to keep saying this. The more you grow and get your name out there as this awesome guy in the finance world, think about how good that looks for them. Right? Now, obviously, there's, if you're doing it in a bad way, then it doesn't look great for them. But it's there's companies that are there is the ability to do both. And you are the perfect example of that, because you just have to find the right fit. You have to find the right job. You have to find the right company. You have to find the right people that are going to actually listen to you. I would love to, I know you can't
let me dovetail on that real quick. I would love to dovetail on that.
Yeah, no, please.
Before you jump in super quick. 2 things. One, I had wrestled with this false dilemma of, is it corporate or is it entrepreneurial? And this idea of it has to be one or the other. And a coach spoke into my life, really, the word "and." You know, she was like, "Josh, you're struggling, and it's a false dilemma. What if it was and?" And so that was the question where the light bulb went off, and I was like,
not or, right?
What is that? Okay. And but it was one of those where, having, whether it's books or podcast or coaching, like having people that come into your life and ask the right question can certainly be a huge unlock. So that's where I love conversations like this, because it doesn't have to be reading the whole book or even listening to the whole podcast. You can have those aha moments. Like somebody listening may have just had their aha moment and that's all they need. And so move on and take action. The other thing around corporate, not every corporate company is designed the same. And so pre-Nike, the company I worked for was actually recognized for multiple years as a Gallup great place to work. And so when you think about culture, it's not just about the job title or the income, but there are great companies and cultures out there where, Gallup is on a mission to create engaged employees and engaged workplaces. So find people that have similar values and actually care about culture. And that would be my big plug for, corporations can be a good place to work.
And if more corporations would do that, and if more corporations too, like I think it also goes back to what you said earlier about setting boundaries. And once you have clear boundaries for yourself, like I'm only working until 4:00 in the afternoon, like boom, like that is like a hard boundary. And once you have hard limits and you have those hard boundaries set and you find people and like, you're obviously so good at your job, they want you there. So they're going to work within those boundaries. And as long as you're able to set those boundaries and keep them, you can have an and relationship with being an entrepreneur and being in corporate. But it's once those boundaries, are gone or kind of once you let them be broken, and I would say let them, because really we know this from Mr. Nat Berman in our brand build group.
Yep.
You're the only person that can make or break those boundaries, really. They can't make you, they can't forcibly make you break your boundaries. You would have to break them. And then once you start breaking them, the more it's easier for them to put more in there, right? And give you more. Okay, well, if she did it this time, maybe she'll break it for this. If she did it this time, maybe she'll break it for that, and I think that's a huge thing.
They'll take what you give. They will take what you give. And I think a lot of people run from job to job or run away from corporate because, they say it's a bad XYZ. In reality, I think sometimes those people, what they're feeling is actually this misalignment or frustration is because they're not living in line to their values, or they're making compromises in an important area and they never actually vocalize it. So before you leave somewhere, you have to be mindful of, hey, for me, it would be my identity is grounded in being an engaged father. And that means being present in the small moments. My daughter's graduating, this week. I need to be there. And if you work for a decent boss, they're going to be like, oh, I didn't know. Let's make it happen. And I'm all about getting to deliverables, right? If we have a deliverable on Friday, I won't miss that deliverable, but I'm still going to go see my daughter's graduation at 9 on Thursday. And that's not an issue. And so it's not about working a set block of 9 to 5 and then moving to your family life. It's like, what is important in all areas of your life? And that's going to be a little bit messy.
Yep. And you hustle, and I did use the word hustle because I can't, or work hard or whatever you want to call it. There are nights when you're up until 12 or 1 in the morning, doing more work so that you can have the next 2 or 3 days off. And I mean, it's possible. You just have to have the right people. But, I think the biggest thing too is people don't know what they don't know. Like your boss doesn't, like they're not mind readers. If you don't tell them these are your boundaries, what are they supposed to do? Like they're just going to keep asking you for stuff. And if you keep giving it to them without telling them, no, I'm not doing that, like you said, they'll take what you give. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. It's people like, oh, like there's folks that meet me today, right? The 2024 Josh, or like, they almost see it as this one big leap that I went from A to B, and it's really A to maybe R. I don't know where I'm at on the continuum, but it's like, I discovered Strength Finders as this tool. I'm like, oh, I was leading a team and there was some frustration. And until I did Strength Finders, I'm like, oh, now I understand common language, what your superpowers are, what mine are. But it wasn't until I read Stan Slapp's book, Bury My Heart at Conference Room B, which is a crazy title. He's a great author. But he introduced this idea of you need to know your core values, and that's going to
Mm-hmm.
guide how you show up. And I up until 2000 and maybe 19, or I'm trying to think the day, but I had never thought about values in context of how I show up to work. And so there's been all these like shifts of understanding along the way. And now alignment and purpose are just part of how I'm going to show up. And I bring that into business partner relationships. Yes, I'm doing a corporate FP&A budget, or I'm doing this project, but that doesn't mean that I leave Josh at the door. And so many people are you could just see them hiding behind this corporate facade, and they're scared to show up authentically. And so if
That's
I
who
can
they
come
are.
in
Mm-hmm.
and help them by demonstrating, leading by example, if I can do that and help more people bring their whole selves to work, then that's success.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy how many people mask themselves, whether you have an ADHD brain or not. Like it's just the mask is real.
Totally.
Like the corporate mask is insane. Um,
I'm on a
let's jump
mission to fight it.
into
I'm on a mission to
yeah,
fight
right.
it.
Yes, for sure. Let's jump into technology a little bit because I really want to talk about the technology side of finance, even if it's just for a few minutes, since I am a tech person. I always find it really funny that we were talking about this before we hit record, and I just want to go into it a little bit. I always find it funny because the financial world, right, is crucial to everything, right? Like if you don't have money, you don't eat. I mean, it's kind of this, well, you don't live, like there's all these things. You need money to make life happen. And the technology in the finance world is so antiquated, or at least it has been historically. And I feel like it's changing and has been for the last probably 4 years ish, maybe 5 years. It's done some big pivotal changes, but it was always funny to me that like this is like the core of everything, right? Like the core of society, the core of life, the core of work, the core of everything. You need money. And it's just been awful. Like the actual digital technology part of the finance world was like the green screen of death 1982 software for years before they ever started changing. Would you agree?
100%. Yeah, I would nod my head. Yes.
I mean, I just can't even like it's just always made me so funny because it was like I feel like they were so behind the times, like just banks in general too. And would you, I guess in your world and speaking in general terms, how have you seen this kind of transformation in with digital technology and finance? And I know that you don't directly work in the the technology part of it, but I'm curious just to kind of get your thoughts in like how has it changed? Because I feel like it's transformed in the last, like I said, 4 to 5 years, like almost like overnight.
Yeah, I think I would say two different answers. I'll start with maybe corporate, and then I'll jump to maybe the solopreneur space. But banks. I actually have a background in supporting finance, kind of digital transformation projects across healthcare, education, and that's even how I joined Nike, was being part of their finance crew that understood agile methodology. How do you build software in an agile environment, and connecting the financial forecasting to that? So I'm certainly well versed in technology. And on the corporation side, a lot of corporations are they weren't built in a digitally native environment. They didn't grow up in that space, and so there's so much. We would use the word tech debt, and so these platforms they're getting older. They're not they don't play nice necessarily, and so it just
No.
costs money. And you have to have this internal fortitude as a company to say, I'm going to choose to up level my digital experiences at the expense of maybe the flashy new feature that customers see. And so that's where the courage, and companies across the board are going through that transformation on, will I invest in that transformation? And some will make it, some won't. Some companies are growing up and they're just digital digitally native. And so they don't have all of that legacy technology infrastructure tools to unwind. And so that's, I think, what you're seeing a lot of companies that just can't figure out how to live in two different worlds, but they haven't had the courage to make the big, massive investments in digital transformation. So most of my career has actually been spent either directly supporting or tangentially that digital transformation. So I'm passionate about it. I think companies that do that and have the courage to simplify their infrastructure, those are going to be the companies that really have the technology to interact with consumers and customers in a new way as we move into, a world that's moving faster, right? Customers want new features. They want it faster. And so it just can't exist in the traditional corporate infrastructure.
It's funny because a few weeks ago I talked to Nick Passarelli, and he's also in our brand build group, and he's a compliance officer, and we talked about finance and compliance and technology. And one of the things that people don't realize, because I always hear people like complain about two-factor authentication and like all of this stuff with the finance world, right? Like in pertaining to their money. And I was like, you want this. Like you want to have to do this 2 or 3 times. These people have your money. Like you want this. You want the safety. But like Nick was talking about, compliance is not easy, especially in the finance world. There's a lot of hoops you have to jump through to make sure your tech and your data is compliant with all of the like regulations across the government, especially in the States, and I'm sure it's the same with other countries. But there's so many hoops when it comes to finance and having to make sure that all of that stuff is compliant with all of the rules and regulations. So it's just funny to me when I listen to people get upset about what I just think is such a small thing. Like just hit the button twice. Like, like it's really not that big of a deal. Just get the code, put it in. Like, is it annoying? Yes. Does it take but just do it. Like I would rather do that than have somebody steal all my, data, which still happens. Like if they're
your data or your money, right?
On a regular basis.
Do you want to be the face of an article where, people's savings was, totally wiped out because of XYZ? Like, I don't want to be the face of that article. So I bring on the two-factor authentication. Yeah. It feels like, obviously it seems cliche, but world was simpler, 10, 20, 30 years ago. And I think it's not just about a one-dimensional view of the company's technology stack, but it's also a view of, hey, what's going on around, bad actors and them getting more sophisticated, coming after your data. So you need more protections. But also there's various different country regulations, like China has different data policies. So if you're doing international business, do you have a flexible platform that allows you to do business compliance wise in US versus China? All those different in ESG is a big thing. So there's different regulations in the US versus Europe. And if you don't have the ability to be nimble and flexible, then you're going to be catching up and burning a lot of man hours on manual work that could have been automated if you think about what is the flexibility needed to do business 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now.
Exactly. And it's amazing to me too, because honestly, like with platforms like Stripe, small businesses, it's so easy to set all those automations up behind this secure firewall. Like it's secure. And Stripe is hilarious to me because I have this love-hate relationship with Stripe. It's amazing because it's so easy to set up, but getting it set up, you have to go through layers of authentication, right? Like layer upon layer upon layer upon layer. But then when it's done, it's awesome and it's easy peasy, right? Like you can plug and play it into anything. And it's funny because my customers and clients get so frustrated. They're like, oh my God, you need the code again. And I was like, all right, just make me an admin. I'll put the code in, and I'll do it all, and then I'll transfer it back over. And because they get so frustrated that they have to send me a code, or they have to, click another button or hit yes, I agree. And I'm like, you want this. I'm like, I know it's annoying, but you want this. And you should only have to do it once. Like, unless you completely clear your entire world, then yeah, you're going to have to keep doing this. But it's
I'm laughing. I just set up Stripe on a new product that I launched on my website, and I had to go through the same setup. So I'm laughing because I'm like, yep, I just I
yep,
just went
yep.
through that.
It's like layers upon layers upon layers. But when you think about it, you want it. Like, is it annoying? For sure, but you definitely want it. And it's great. I think it's great that they're finally cracking down. And I see more banks cracking down too now. You know, it's harder to get into your bank account. It's harder to allow somebody else to get into your bank account. Like, I help my mom with her banking because she's going to be 80 in a few years. So, you know, like, I help her out, and we had to kind of jump through hoops. She had to like get a paper, you know, I'm like, Mom, you want this? She's like, this is horrible. I'm like, no, this is good. That means they're protecting your identity and protecting your money. Like, we want this. And it's just funny. The whole world, the whole thing is, if we had not, or if the finance world had not tried to catch up and had not started making these changes in the last 5 years and really started to pivot, and just, you'd see a lot. You would be the picture. You'd be that person for that headline, right? Because they wouldn't have anything protecting anything. It would be the old school and the new school crashing together, and it would not end well.
I think it's tough because you have not just financial services apps, you know, maybe your bank or whatnot, but now everybody has one because your data is, you know, your attention and your data are some of the two most valuable assets that you have. And so now everything has some kind of authentication, and there is a sense of burnout. I mean, man, every app has this. And so you have people that are even digitally educated, there's frustration, but then you have people that are in their 60s, in their 70s, in their 80s, they still have life to live, and they're trying to engage in the world, and they're just overwhelmed because
They're just trying to pay their
that's not what they
bills.
did, right? They're just, and so I think that's where there's this really interesting, you know, generational divide with technology and how fast it's growing up and evolving, and people are just trying to survive, and there's a sense of overwhelm and frustration on, like, can I just do the basic task of paying a bill or ordering something? And some people are like, this doesn't work.
You're lucky too with Nike, because you are doing finance. You know, you're working in the kind of finance sector for a company who has like e-commerce down on lockdown, right? Like, their digital world and their digital experience world is awesome, right? Like, Nike has one of the best brands that's out there. And so you're a little lucky there, because you're walking into this organization that like gets it, right? Because finance or not, like, they've been selling online for years, and they've kind of got this digital experience thing down, like, no, like nobody's business. Would you say that is the same from your perspective with their finances as well? Like, I know you can't get into like super
Yeah.
needs, but I'm just curious from an outsider's perspective. Is that side of the business, like the operations side of the business, as clean and awesome as like their branded customer experience out of the business?
Yeah, I would say, you know, so I joined Nike kind of in the Nike digital space. And so I've been part of cool projects that have been forward facing, but also behind the scenes. So I've supported the Nike.com website. I've supported the Nike app, the sneakers app. And so all of these digital commerce platforms, I've been part of seeing the journey on what's the feature, what's the investment required, what's the ROI. I've seen that journey behind the scenes. So it's super cool. And I'm very happy to be a part of it. Part of the omni-channel experience, helping stores understand, well, what's the technology in the stores to make sure that it's seamless if a shopper is searching online and wants to go to the store. So Nike's certainly still figuring it out, but we are making a very focused effort on what does it mean for the consumer? What do they need? And so that's certainly, noticed by folks like yourself. On the behind the scenes, you know, we are going through our own digital transformation, which is, you know,
There's
a
always
company this
growing
size,
pains.
there's always growing pains. But, you know, when I joined Nike, our revenue was, I think, just over 25 billion at like 26 billion. And we just hit over 50. So I've seen our revenue 2x since I joined. And I want to be, my goal is like, hey, how do I help in my current role, whatever it is today or tomorrow? How do I help be part of the journey that takes Nike from 50 billion in revenue to 100 billion? And so what we're doing now is really behind the scenes preparing for what that journey looks like. And the reality is what we see today is going to be a different world 3 years from now, 4 years from now, because of stuff that isn't even invented yet, right? And so we have to be nimble, and our customers will evolve, their expectations will evolve. And that's where I love even the culture of Nike is, that we say internally, there is no finish line, meaning celebrate your success today, right? Show up, be awesome, make today your masterpiece. But ultimately, it's always evolving. You're always getting better, right? The athlete of today may not be the athlete of tomorrow in terms of what they need to do to compete. And so I love being part of a company where that's their DNA, right? Is to be better, to be innovative. Before Nike, I would get articles like Fast Company or magazines or Inc. And I would just read about companies like who inspires me. And I can still remember reading about, this fabric or that shoe or this innovation. And so I want to be part of creativity, innovation, and growth. And that's where for me in that corporate lens of, hey, let's get in there and make it happen. And I can be a small part of that growth journey, then I'm all for it.
I think that's awesome because, like I said, they're one of the larger brands that's doing it right. Is it perfect? Probably not. And I don't think anybody's digital transformation journey, especially with the way AI is blowing up and all this stuff's blowing up,
Yep.
None of that's going to be perfect. And who knows what the next 5 years are going to bring. But it's so cool to watch companies like that from the outsider's perspective. I can't even imagine what it looks like from your perspective. So very cool to you. And I think I just can't wait. I just want a discount on shoes. I'm just kidding. If you could help a girl out, that's awesome. I kind of have a sneaker thing. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. No, you would see.
I bet your girls love that, right? Like, do they get all the sneakers they want?
They didn't at first, so I'll say two things. They didn't actually at first because before Nike, my job included traveling and training teams kind of in US based locations. And so they got to go to Las Vegas, Arizona, Florida, Virginia. They got to go see some really, they saw the White House for the first time and the Lincoln Memorial the same time I saw
That's
those
awesome.
because I brought them along with me. So they got to travel. They were known by the company. My youngest daughter would walk up to our CEO and tell him jokes. And so it was really family. I was just known, my family was known, and they loved to go travel. When I joined Nike, I actually asked them, I was like, hey, so what do you think about me and Nike? They're like, the shoes are cool, but we don't travel anymore. So they actually enjoyed being immersed into, but they wanted to be immersed into what I was doing. And that's a great call to action for any parents of bring your kids along and let them know what your world's like. Now, the family did make a vote. What I would say is, I got into my career. I wasn't quite sure if Nike was going to be kind of my long term. And so we were contemplating, do I pivot to a new role, new company? And the family actually took a vote, and it was decidingly overwhelming that I was to stay at Nike for a little bit longer because after a certain amount of time, you get your lifetime or your discount is locked in for life. And so now me and my girls, right, my family, they have that discount for life. And so there was a vote. And they do enjoy the discounts, and they're like, "Hey, Dad, whatever you do, you gotta stick it out for one more year because
you gotta stay.
We want the discount." So there is the sense of the discount is awesome. Walking into a store and walking out feeling like, "Are we gonna get arrested because this feels like too good to be true?" Like that's the experience that my kids get for the rest of their life. So one of the small perks for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's so awesome. That's great. I would totally, yeah. That is a perk that I would take a vote for. That's awesome. All right, we are well over time. I have enjoyed this conversation immensely. This has been so much fun. Take a few seconds. Tell the people watching and listening where they can find you, how they can interact with you and contact you.
Definitely. I would say I'll give two plugs. One, for my book, Catalyst, that is my gift. It's the gift I gave to my kids about if I could share one thing about how to spark personal transformation. That's my book, Catalyst. And you can find me at my website, catalystignite.com.
Awesome. And you can also find him on LinkedIn. Go check out his story.
Yep.
It's very cool. And that is a wrap. And remember, technology is only good when it works. And we will see you next week. Bye, everybody.